A vegetable will react, but it cannot learn. It'll react intelligently, too. Consider a tree threatened by erosion. Consider that tremendous engineering job which the tree does in throwing that network of roots back into the bank. But that's an automatic reaction. It's an intelligent reaction. But you can't teach a tree to do that. A tree just does it. But you can teach an amoeba something new. You can teach him to stay out of a certain area with a weak electric shock. And he'll remember this. And pretty soon he won't ever go in that area again. He's learned something. That's a learned response. Primitive, but still learned. And you can never do that with a vegetable. Why does God permit this to happen? Because God doesn't interfere with his own natural laws. He establishes laws which are good for the whole of creation. And he does not interfere. And again, is this child denied survival? I question the use of the word child to describe this living creature. This child never obtained personality. Remember, personality is not an automatic acquisition. Personality, which is the prerequisite to survival, not the key, but the prerequisite, never appears spontaneously. Each personal creature received his personality as a result of a distinctly volitional act on the part of the Universal Father. This seems to be automatic because God is consistent. He isn't whimsical in the bestowal of personality. If the conditions are right, he gives the creature personality. Why? He wants children. God's interested in his family. He is a father. He wants all the children he can have. And being an infinite father, he has just as much affection for the next child as though it were his only child. Remember, God loves you, each one of you, just as though you were the only creature in all the universes. And he had no one else to think about. We should remember always to keep our thinking clear. God the omnipotent is not God the omnificent. That God has all power does not mean that he uses all power in all situations. He can do all things, but he does not choose to. Omnipotence implies that God is responsible for everything that happens. Well, you wind up with pantheism. Typical example of clever pantheistic teaching. This is from Hinduism, which holds that God is present in all things. Says the pupil to his teacher, "But teacher, yesterday God in me was almost trampled by God in the elephant." Says the clever teacher, "But my son, did you not see God in the elephant driver warning you to get out of the way?" That's very clever, but it's not truth, is it? But this is a good way of how you play around in pantheism. You can always bring something in, you know. Having established these laws, God abides by them. And if you want to pray for a suspension of law, if you do this in ignorance, I think this is good praying. If you do this wittingly, it's close to blasphemy. Because you are attempting now to practice magic. You are attempting to bend God's laws and God's will to your will and your desires in the universe. This is magic. we should recognize that in an idiot, let's say that the word idiot describes what we're talking about. It's the lowest designation for human mentality. Let's say that in an idiot, we do not have a true human being. We have a living creature in human form, which calls for some sentimentality on our part. And we project a great deal into that living creature. We wish that creature were human. Jesus recognized this difference. You'll recall that in Naples, he gave money to a beggar, but spoke no words of encouragement to that beggar. And when Ganid chided him, Jesus answered in effect, Ganid, this is a subhuman being. He has no capacity to understand what I might say. Jesus didn't hesitate to help this being physically with money, but he didn't waste his words on it. This is where you draw your line, and it includes some human progeny, because you do not have the keyboard there. The artist cannot play the music. The piano is too imperfect. Now, let's look at it this way. We're looking at the scrap product of a process, the procreative process, which is operated by human beings. Operated by. They don't know what they're doing, really. They're responding to some very deep-seated urges. Or have you ever looked at two teenagers looking at each other that way? Isn't that painful to watch them? I'm so glad I would hate to be young again. They suffer too much. But they really burn. They really burn. This is how good a job has been done on this point. This mechanism has been operated untended. Nobody goes in to keep it in repair. It just goes on and on and on. And to me it would be strange if in an imperfect universe, on rare occasions, this mechanism did not break down. It is not quite perfect. But consider how unerringly it functions for the most part. In fact, it functions with embarrassing accuracy if the couple doesn't have to be married. That's when they're sure to have a normal, healthy child. Or if they get married quickly, they have a premature child. Very few second babies are premature. Let's consider a child who is injured. A child is a perfectly normal child. The function of the cortex is destroyed by a forceps delivery. This can happen, or it can be impaired. I know of a couple of cases where individuals with seemingly low IQs are the children of high IQ parents and in turn produce high IQ progeny, and they bear a history of forceps delivery, which just plain damage this thing in the process of getting born. What happens to that child, I think, depends on what happens to the parent or parents. I have the belief that such children fall in the general category of those children who survive dependent on parental survival. Just as an unborn baby is dependent on the survival of the mother in order to achieve life. Except in the universe looks at the father as the carrier of the child as much as the mother. If either parent survives, that child, I think, wakes up on the system nursery. This would apply also to a child who sustained brain damage in the second year, the third year, the fourth year. Just as in the case of an adult, if you go crazy, or let's say you're in a bad accident and your head is pretty well smashed up, and you're reduced to a vegetable state, as far as the universe is concerned, you died in that accident. They don't let the life in your body confuse them. They balance your books, and they treat that accident as lethal because the human being died. The human body didn't happen to die. The human being, sure, we need a body, but the essence of man lives, I think, in the nervous system and in the cortex. We come close to living in the living electricity that travels over our nerves and that operates up in here. Slow-moving electricity. Neuricity is the name they give to it. Does this make sense? We got talking about when does personality come. Now I'm going to stick my neck out in a way that the divine counselors won't. They won't answer that question in this book. But you see, I know so little that I'm not in the least abashed to answer it. Watching children develop, I would offer this as comforting thinking. I think personality seems to emerge about the 24th month. Now please remember what I said, seems to emerge. I didn't say it got there then. And I didn't say it wasn't emerging a little while before then. And I don't say it doesn't continue to emerge afterwards. But it seems to me that that child begins to come into focus. I'm picking the 4th month arbitrarily. Some youngsters a little sooner, some youngsters a little later.
Why don't you give us just a little background on personality?
We're talking about a fourth reality, something which is neither matter, mind, nor spirit. It's not personality as it's used in the English language. They attach a special meaning to personality. It is a quality which has no quantity, in contrast to matter, mind, and spirit, which exist as quality and quantity. And the best symbolism I can give you is this. Think of the color red. Now, you can think of that color satisfactorily, but you never saw red in the abstract. You can only perceive an object which is red. Similarly, you never find personality in the abstract. You always perceive a being who is a person. Functional personality, manifest personality, requires a living organism of some kind. Physical or spiritual or some combination. An angel has a personality and is a spirit person. We are physical and we're also personalities. Personality is a gift of God. And when he gives it, he liberates that creature from slavish response to antecedent causation. All persons have relative freedom of choice within the framework of that which is choosable. Hence are, in a sense, creative. And it's in this sense that we're made in God's image. This is the difference between a child and a robot. We can tell God to go to hell. We have that power of choice. Or we can say, God, look, I buy. This deal makes good sense. Let's have at it together. I'm picking this arbitrarily. We've talked a lot about when does personality come. And I said, well, I have this feeling. I think I'm seeing it emerge. I don't say when it came, but I think it begins to be manifest. Now, we know that it's there before the 5th year. because that's when the thought adjuster arrives, God's Spirit that lives in man. And we know that there's one prerequisite to adjuster indwelling. That is, the creature must have made its first moral choice, which is probably as between selfishness and altruism. And we know that a moral choice cannot be made unless personality is functioning. Personality makes moral discriminations. Animals discriminate, but not in the moral sense of the word. Animals are characterized by behavior. We apply a different word to humans. We speak of it as conduct, which implies insight into the consequences of the act. An animal will discriminate as to how to achieve a given end. Man makes the same discrimination, but he also, in advance of taking action, can make a decision, is this end desirable? That's a discrimination an animal wouldn't make. Animals have choice, but on a subpersonal, submoral level. Man chooses. Much of man's choice, I think, is highly mammalian. There isn't any morality in it at all. It's just happenstance. Yeah, what am I going to have for lunch? That's not a moral choice. But man can make moral choices. And the real choices in a human being are moral choices. And man can also make spiritual choices. When a man says, it is my will that your will be done, that goes beyond morality. That's a free will choice of God's will. And I think that's very gratifying to God, because we don't have to make that choice.
The laws don't put it that early, do they?
No. I would just offer the 24th month as a good time to talk about. I don't know when it comes, but it seems to me as I look at children, somewhere, give or take a little ways, either way, it's about at this time that this child becomes really vivid as a distinct individual and emerges from babyishness, which is a more general thing. Do you know what I mean? All babies are kind of alike. Sure, they're different too. But it's shortly thereafter the child learns the word no and sets his choice against adult choice. The child begins to experiment and does things deliberately that he knows better than to do. He's been told not to do. And dogs don't ordinarily do this. You can condition a dog in a fairly uncomplicated way. Question?
Bill, there are two things I'd like to talk about a little bit. One is when an adult should, as he said, be in an accident and not have mental capacity anymore, even though he goes on living. What is the time that he remains on this earth?
Could an adult survive while his body was still alive?
No. What happens to the? I mean,
what goes on
inside? Is
inside?
that time put in?
Well, in the first place, remember that they look at time differently than we do. A 5 or 10 year delay would be completely insignificant in their reckoning. And if an adult were badly banged up, he wouldn't know very much about it, probably.
No, it wouldn't matter for him.
So it doesn't make too much difference to him either. Let's say that you've got brain damage that's beyond recovery, and they wind up the affairs of this mortal. I think they detach the adjuster. The adjuster says, nothing you do. There's no mind to work in anymore. I suspect they would let that adult alone until the body died. But if somebody wanted to take the other position and argue and say, why don't they detach the soul too and let him survive, I think you could put up a pretty good argument for it. If you detach one, you might argue by analogy, you detach the other. You could also say, why jump the gun? As long as the body's alive, let's not confuse the issue. Let's wait till everything is dead. And you could put up a good argument on that side. I'll pick either side and debate.
Well,
And actually, what we're talking about is not particularly significant.
no, it isn't. It was just a question that I
Yeah.
thought of. And first,
It's a good question.
If you want to go a little bit further, you could say, what if all this happens and then he regains his...
I'm sure many
power?
may look.
But that wouldn't happen.
I'm sure they would know whether there was a chance for recovery. And were there, then I don't think they'd wind up these affairs. This would be a hiatus in the mortal career, but not a termination.
Well, that's fine. Now, the other thing I want you to talk about is we're taught that God is love.
Yes.
And you know, and we all know that there are cases of parents who have children like that who the parents are capable of divine love, expressing and feeling divine love, but the child might not be. Now,
Say that again now. The parents are capable of feeling and expressing divine love,
yes.
but the child,
If it's an idiot, it
Oh.
loves back, but it doesn't.
it loves back. Well, a dog loves back too.
Yeah. But,
You have mammalian affection and gratitude there, which is subhuman. A dog develops affection for a master. Cats develop toleration. The species expresses itself. A horse develops affection. A porpoise can develop affection. This is true with all the higher mammals. Even the carnivorous animals can develop affection.
I realize that, but if you were a parent like that, it would be...
You're torn in two. You're torn in small pieces. And always remember, personal creatures, I believe, tend to project more personality into subpersonal creatures than is actually there. We invest our dog with more personal qualities than the dog has. Now, the dog has individuality, no question about it. And the dog shows affection, and the dog can have his feelings hurt. But again, I think we read into the dog more than the dog reads into himself. There's one great difference between a dog and a man. A dog knows, but a dog does not know that he is a dog.
Yeah, but you're talking about a dog with a regular dog mind.
With a normal mind.
Well, Minnie May, what I'm saying is that what we say of the dog, we can say of the idiot. We're dealing, I think, with the same level of mind.
No, I don't think so, Bill.
I do.
Dog has a normal mind.
Well,
Normal dog mind.
well, let's say I'm giving the idiot full marks. The most that the idiot has is a 5-adjutant mind.
I agree with you.
Now, what's missing in the idiot is the instinctive endowment which helps the dog operate normally at his level. The idiot doesn't have the physique or the instinctive endowments which the dog has. He's missed the boat both ways. He's missed the instinctive drives, and he's failed in the acquisition of the human drives. But
Some brain capacity is very large for physical size is concerned. It's not a function of size, is it? It's not a function of chemical composition.
So I don't know what it is. It'd probably take a darn good neurologist and brain surgeon to go in there and find out. You can tell functionally, though, that it isn't working. Just isn't working. Yeah. It gets tougher when you go above the idiot level. I remember many years ago we ran some tests on a gal, 14. She had the makings of becoming a very beautiful woman. She was unable to take the test. Her mother had to help her and explain questions and break them down and help her make her choices. And this kid was a moron. I don't think this girl will ever distinguish between right and wrong. I don't think you could say that she's capable of an immoral act, because I don't think she knows what morality is. It's beyond her grasp. And I'm awfully glad I don't know what happened to her. Now there's a real tragedy, because you don't have an idiot here. You have a person who can speak, but who is well, there's a vacant expression in her eyes. She responds to the immediate physical stimulus, and she's very amiable and quite beautiful too at 14. There's one that would break a parent's heart, right wide open.
Like on her question, there are people, we all know, that can attach the same affection to an inanimate object.
Yeah.
And feel just as badly hurt when that object is lost or destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
I think that ability of the personality to project itself.
Children do this particularly with a doll. It becomes an alter ego. They talk to it, and it too has personality. Jocko was bad today. Jocko has to be punished, to be put to bed. I mean, Jocko was a very real being to that child. Question?
You talked about two types of abnormalities, one of which didn't have the gray matter from the beginning, and the other that had physical damage.
Later on.
Later on, yes. What about the schizophrenic or the paranoid who is a subject of environmental damage?
Well, is it environmental, or do you have a basic flaw which environmental pressures developed? I think the schizophrenic, the paranoia, the chap was honest to God paranoia. I think the boiler wouldn't take pressure. The flaw was in the original manufacture of the boiler. And as pressures build up, one plate went out or another plate went out.
Well, would you assume that all boilers that are percolating all right, apparently so, and never have the environment to blow the plate or blow to you?
Oh, I think you can.
Is a normal?
I think you can blow any boiler, but I don't think they blow in the direction of insanity. You'll get a psychosomatic repercussion under intense pressure. I think almost everybody has a breaking point.
Well, if this is the case, and in fact, if we be very specific with your analogy, then all are subnormal.
No, they're not subnormal. The mere fact that it's like strength of material. You get a breaking point for most materials, or a bending point, or a loss of elasticity, which is partial failure. I think this is true in the people. And now, here's another principle I want to offer you. This universe is not run by a bookkeeper. This universe is run on a basic principle. If justice is in doubt, mercy prevails. If there is doubt, the question is always resolved in favor of the creature concerned. Let's say that you had two children, and we'll say that they had a breaking point. Let's take a percentile scale, where the average breaking point is 50, and the toughest breaking point would be 100. And the easiest would be 0 or 1, yeah. Oh, yeah. We're talking about our percentile scale in our two sons. And let's say that both of these boys, let's make them identical twins. And they got a break point of 80. Yeah, one's 81 and one's 79, but we'll call that 80. One twin marries fortunately. The other one marries unfortunately. one twin has a wife who is a great help to him, a great comfort, a great strength. The other one has a wife who is kind of a deadweight. He has to carry her like ballast. The fortunate twin is equally fortunate in his selection of a job. The unfortunate twin goes to work for the wrong company at the wrong place, at the wrong time, as the wrong boss. At age 50, the unfortunate twin has a nervous breakdown. And let's say that we have the means to evaluate the stress factor. We can give it a number that would be accurate. The fortunate twin with a tensile strength at 80 has been operating in a stress with a stress factor that averages out about 45. He's never really been challenged. The other guy has been up against a stress factor of 95, where 100 is a limit. Now, if as a father you had to evaluate these two, wouldn't you be pretty merciful to the twin who's gone up against a much rougher deal? Because the potential break was in the other one, it just didn't happen. That's the kind of evidence, I think, that goes into the whole question of human survival. The first question they ask when they open court is, who is this creature? What kind of a person are we dealing with here? And when they say, who is he, I think they want to know everything. The hereditary potential, the environmental circumstances, the reaction of the creature to the environment. The second question they ask is, did he make a decision? And if the answer is no, then they supplement this question. They said, did he have time to make a decision? And if that answer is no, they suspend the case and put it on the table and decree survival. Every creature is given adequate time to make one first-class decision, pro or con, concerning that creature in relation to God. And again, as they say, we make no claim to operate this universe with flawless justice. We do claim to operate a merciful and understanding administration. God as a father transcends God as a judge. Now this is very comforting to me. We are not subjects of a king. We're children in the family. It has its penalties. God wants to be merciful to one of our brothers, and this brother happens to be a temporary stinker. We have to put up with it. And you can't get away from that. This is inherent in being a part of a family.
Maybe you answered my question. If you did, I didn't understand it.
All right, I'm talking about the schizoids and the paranoids, and the relationship between environmental stress and inherent original genetic weakness. I think there are some paranoids and schizoids who in a less stressful environment would not go paranoid or would not develop schizophrenia. In today's stressful environment, in the 20th century, is a real deal. I think the stress factors have gone up, and there's a greater possibility for breakdown. But I'm sure that these people are dealt with equal consideration and fairness.
What I was trying to get at is the definition
Of normal?
of human and subhuman.
Well, these people are human.
Which you have said, this lies all above the line there.
Yeah, I think so.
So these are imperfections.
These people were normal and then became abnormal. Yeah. They were sane and then became insane.
Along with the analogy of the water and the breaking point, we can have a human being like
spoon with D words and crack up into capsule.
Would be understandable.
Would be very understandable.
Certainly.
Now, did this make him any more human or subhuman?
No.
As in your,
No.
the way you're
No.
talking about.
No, I would say that normal people have the capacity to go a little haywire this way or that way. It's just a question of how much stress do you encounter. Something will give way, given enough stress, I think. Now, if that isn't enough, let's double it. I think we'd each find our break point. I get a psychosomatic reaction in my innards when I encounter sustained pressure requiring very high concentration with no let-up for a period of, let's say, 5 or 6 successive days. Here, visualize this meeting here, and let's say this is a corporate meeting, which is how I make my living. And Monday we deal with Division 1, and Tuesday and so forth, and then Saturday and Sunday we take the corporation apart, and I never get out of that hotel suite for 6 or 7 days. I have a VP for breakfast and a sales manager for nightcaps. Now, along about Friday, I'll feel this in my innards. That's my physiological protest to sustained intellectual and some emotional stress. We're thinking all the time. There's no letdown. So I say, well, this is wonderful. I just don't have to take a laxative. I know what it is, and I go right on working, see? Now, somebody else might stress in terms of a migraine headache, which would impair their efficiency. This doesn't impair my efficiency, it just shortens my leash. Now, I don't know what would happen if the stresses went up. Stress is a matter of apparent chance. Apparent chance. Let's say, however, let's do a little romancing. Let's say that you have caught the religion bug. You've been bitten with it. The virus is spoiling. Hello, Frankie. Well, now we'll have to talk about the blue book. We've been talking about you all afternoon, Frankie. Let's say that you've got a real yearning to be useful. You've got a real vision of the father and his family. And you've got a real feeling that these are your brothers down here. And you're not a do-gooder. A do-gooder just blindly goes out and lashes around, and creates an awful lot of consternation and turmoil. I have a horror of do-gooders. Let's say you're more sophisticated than this. And you say, well, gee, I want to be useful, but how? And you finally decide to talk to your father about this. And so you engage in some very earnest, honest, and sincere prayer. And the essence of your prayer is, Father, help me to be more useful to my fellow men. And you mean this as much as man can mean anything which he can articulate in his mind in words. Well, do you realize what you're doing? You're signing blank sight drafts payable on yourself. Because maybe God's only way of answering your prayer is to put you through hell and high water. Some of you folks aren't old enough, but some of you are, to remember steak before aging. Can you hear that steak being pounded on? Yeah, I can. We're dating ourselves. But many times you have a big wooden platter, and you got the hammer out, and you pound it on the steak. This was tenderizing in the very primitive ages, yes. And I've many times symbolized, how do you tenderize the human heart? Maybe the greatest thing that stops you from being useful is you're too damned hard-boiled. You're lacking in empathy and understanding. You need to become a more tender person. And let's say that as they look you over, the only way they can tenderize you is to pound on you. So when you pray to be made more useful, you are asking to be pounded on. You don't realize this. Because who in his right mind would ask for a deal like this? So your prayers are answered, and you're hit with tribulation right up to your ever-loving eyebrows. And you say, what happened? See? You're getting your prayers answered. And maybe out of this, if you can take it, you achieve a greater measure of humility, understanding, and usefulness to your fellow men. When you pray legitimately to do God's will or to be helped, that's always a legitimate prayer. You're doing a horrible thing. You're signing blank site drafts drawn on yourself. And you're just asking somebody to fill them in. Because you're giving them the right to do this. That's why I say tribulation comes by apparent chance.
This is a terrific power of attorney.
Yes, sir. But I'm not so sure it's all chanceful. I think our friends have some ability to manipulate the circumstances of life. For want of a nail, a shoe was lost, etc. I mean, it's that kind of simple little stuff. And I think if you really want to be helpful, and you have to be purged of something, I think they're going to cooperate with you. I don't think all tribulation is purely chance. The papers give us a definition of chance. They say chance is a word which means that man is either too ignorant or too indolent to find out why. There is no such thing as pure chance in the universe. There's always causation. Except sometimes the causation is far too complex for man to ever comprehend. So chance is a very convenient word to use. I once hit a situation by apparent chance. I'm sitting in a cocktail lounge with a chap. We're both 2 sheets in the wind. And I suddenly discover this guy needs spiritual help like I've never seen a human being need it in my whole life. And of course this happens after if we both had 3 martinis. This is not being in the pink of condition, my friend. And I looked under the table, no angels. I looked over the whole damn bar, no angels. There are never any angels when you need them. And I did some pretty straight praying. I said, look, this is not my business, this is yours, see? And if you wanted to be a little helpful, it would be most appropriate on this particular occasion. I don't pray for new business, but I pray when I'm working with a boss. I think I have a right to that. The words came. I've never had better words in my whole life. It sold this guy. And afterwards, he thanked me. I think I have a right to that. The words came. I've never had better words in my whole life. It sold this guy. And afterwards, he thanked me. I said, listen, friend, how did we happen to be sitting in that cocktail lounge? I said, the only reason I asked you was I had some time to kill before train time. You look like a good drinking companion. Well, he said, geez, it was providential. I said, wait a minute. Always ask the question, but never be so stupid as to try to answer it. Asking the question means you have an open mind. Answering the question means you're a plain damn fool. You think you know the answer. Ask that question, but never try to answer it. Was it chance that caused Philip and Nathaniel to be sitting on the road when Jesus and the 4 apostles came by? You can't prove it wasn't chance. But of course, to me, that was a little bit too fortunate. I would ask the question, was it chance? But I wouldn't try to answer that question. There's a great statement made in the papers. While Jesus was visiting Jerusalem, he met two people who were to be most important to his later adult life. A Hindu merchant, export-import merchant, and his son. Hello, Wilma. It says he met them by apparent chance. And this suggests to me that the authors of these papers are puzzled. And I've done some investigating. Where were the piano wires? Because it was too fortuitous. This was too much luck. And it also tells me that they can't unravel it. As far as they are able to determine, this was pure chance. But they've looked into the matter. I believe in providence, but I don't believe we recognize it very often. I think mostly what we pray for is a life of ease. God, I hope we strike oil, you know. Or I hope Aunt Mahoofy remembers me when she passes into the great beyond. And I don't think maybe this is good luck. This might be bad luck. It could be that the acquisition of unearned wealth would be highly corrosive to an let's say a premature individual. This could corrupt a potentially fine citizen into a playboy. And however much fun that would be, and I've looked at those flesh pots, and with some hope, I had a great uncle who could have done it. He gave away $100 million, and but I ate Post Toasties, and he made cornflakes, so that was that. But however longingly we might look in that direction, when you add the whole score up, would it be good? Would you know how to handle that kind of wealth? Wouldn't it be fun? Wouldn't it be fun? I think providence is at work all the time. But I don't think we recognize its manipulations, because our notion of good luck and their notion of providential good fortune, I think, are as opposite as day and night. It says in the papers that civilization is being forged out between the anvils of anguish and the hammers of suffering. Now, does that mean God is cruel? No. It means that we are so damn stupid and stubborn that this is about the only thing we'll respond to. Did you ever stop and think, genetically, we're undoubtedly akin to the simian tribes, but psychologically, I'd prefer to pick mules. We show a much greater kinship with mules than monkeys. Of course, that same stubbornness can be good if it's well directed. You know, the stubborn man is the man you disagree with. The man of great courage is the man you agree with. Wilma, how are you? Just grand. How was Seattle? Did you enjoy that Space Needle? It's real pretty, isn't it?
Well, the engineering, and I'm very
No.
this day.
There's a nice whip up there on a windy day, too.
Is it?
Yeah.
On the other day, it's real still. It's real nice, but
What else you want to talk about?
I just wonder sometimes if that route couldn't have been originally tended.
I think some people are more tender than others. And some tender people are lacking in courage, too. Regardless of how it comes to be, there it is. I think they intend to make it tender by nature. But then, stop and think. God has a plan. Let me work this both ways. This is fun. We'll explain it and then we'll mystify it, just like a sermon. Near the end, I'll put in the arousement. Then we'll have an altar call. God has a plan. You can read about it in part 2, where they describe the development of a normal world. And ours has deviated radically from normal planetary evolution. This looks like an easier way to do things. But God's plan is subject to modification by every free will creature involved in that plan, ending up with folks like us sitting around the table here. We can help louse it up too, or we can augment it. The divine plan for this world was radically altered by 2 happenings. The head of our planetary government, superhuman government, rebelled, and Adam and Eve defaulted. And as they say, our world has pursued a stormy course ever since. We're going to have to work our way out slowly. Now we're talking about God's plan as God plans in relation to finite things and beings and events and time and space. But God also plans above this level. God not only works in time and space, God also transcends time and space, and he does these things simultaneously. This is still less than his absolute function, which we'll ignore in this discussion. I get enough on the transcendental level. God's transcendental plans may allow for all of these deviations, and I think they do. So that in a larger sense, I don't think God is surprised by what happens down here, or is dismayed. I think this is how he provides for interesting variations in the normal plans. Because virtue comes out of this disaster. On a world such as ours, people grow up lacking in many of the niceties of planetary culture, but they grow up awfully tough. They grow up hard-boiled. They grow up with a higher breaking point than perhaps is developed on other worlds, because the pressures are greater here. Here we encounter injustices. Here we encounter unkindness. Here we encounter unfairness. All kinds of evils long persist in a stormy world such as ours. And the meeting of these challenges must tremendously enhance the tensile strength of the people who survive from a world such as this. We have a reputation, folks that come from worlds like ours, because there are others. We have a reputation for toughness. Not the cruel, unkind toughness, but the survival type of toughness. We draw the tough assignments up there. If they've got an assignment where things are up, Burke, look up the section on ag and dollars for me, will you? If they've got an assignment where things are tough, they're apt to pick a survivor from a world like ours. I've used this illustration. It is the War of 1812. You are a colonel in the American Army, and you're operating against the British and the Indians. And you have 2 lieutenants in your organization. One is a Harvard graduate. They had him in those days. He's an awfully nice guy from Philadelphia. Cultured, well-read, and so on. The other is a chap who grew up in a log cabin along the bloody Kentucky frontier. And you have got to send a man overland to get a vital message through. Who are you going to pick? The Harvard man or the frontiersman? You pick the frontiersman. And that doesn't mean that the Eastern culture isn't desirable, and the knowledge of which fork to use, and the enjoyment of good napery and good service isn't desirable. But you've got a tough assignment. Now, we are lacking in this world the refinements of Philadelphia and a college education, let's say. We have the virtues that come with the Daniel Boone type of existence. It's tough. It's what Jesus meant when he said to Thomas. He said, Thomas, you've seen and believed. But he said, blessed are those who in the ages to come believe, though they see not. This is the acid test of faith. Can you sustain it without evidence? Why don't we knock off and have a coffee break?
Okay.
You want to turn these off?
Helen will.
Well, you know why?
I'd like to tell you what
You're on the air. George.
Are we?
Hello,
Oh, goodbye, Wilma.
In connection with your talk on adversity and certainly of reading, right in the rest of that might look very apropos.
Well, we're broadcasting the crematories right there in the city where you are. I wonder what they do in a case like that.
They don't even embalm them. They just bury them.
I want to do two things. First, let's put a period to our discussion of adversity. And then Clyde has made a suggestion which I think is excellent. We've been touching on a normal versus an abnormal world. And I think it would be fun for all of us, especially our newcomers, to talk about what is normal and what is abnormal. Would you like that? How do planetary histories compare? But first, adversity. Many may pick this out. But life will become a burden of existence unless you learn how to fail gracefully. There is an art in defeat, which noble souls always acquire. You must know how to lose cheerfully. You must be fearless of disappointment. Never hesitate to admit failure. Make no attempt to hide failure under deceptive smiles and beaming optimism. It sounds well to claim success, but the end results are appalling. Such a technique leads directly to the creation of a world of unreality and to the inevitable crash of ultimate disillusionment. Success may generate courage and promote confidence, but wisdom comes only from the experiences of adjustment to the results of one's failures. Men who prefer optimistic illusions to reality can never become wise. Only those who face facts and adjust them to ideals can achieve wisdom. Wisdom embraces both the fact and the ideal, and therefore saves its devotees from both of those barren extremes of philosophy, the man whose idealism excludes facts, and the materialist who is devoid of spiritual outlook. Those timid souls who can only keep up the struggle of life by the aid of continuous false illusions of success are doomed to suffer failure and experience defeat as they ultimately awaken from the dream world of their own imaginations. And it is this business of facing failure and adjusting to defeat that the far-reaching vision of religion exerts its supreme influence. Failure is simply an educational episode, a cultural experiment in the acquirement of wisdom, in the experience of the God-seeking man who is embarked on the eternal adventure of the exploration of a universe. To such men, defeat is but a new tool for the achievement of higher careers of universe reality. The career of a God-seeking man may prove to be a great success in the light of eternity, even though the whole temporal life enterprise may appear to be an overwhelming failure, provided each life failure yielded the culture of wisdom and spirit achievement. Do not make the mistake of confusing knowledge, culture, and wisdom. They are related in life, but they represent vastly differing spiritual values. Wisdom ever dominates knowledge and always glorifies culture. That's an excerpt of Greek philosophy from the talk of a Greek philosopher who became converted to the gospel of the kingdom. That's Greek philosophy.
Did you want the reference on Agamemnon?
That is 1779 and 1780. Read about Agamemnon's birth.
On Jerusalem, the ascenders in the isolated world occupy a residential sector by themselves and are known as the Agamemnons, meaning evolutionary will creatures who can believe without seeing, persevere when isolated, and triumph over insuperable difficulties even when alone. This functional grouping of the Agamemnons persists throughout the ascension of the local universe and the traversal of the superuniverse. It disappears during the sojourn in Havona, but promptly reappears upon the attainment of paradise and definitely persists in the core of the mortal finality. Tabamancha is an Agamemnon of finaliter status, having survived from one of the quarantine spheres involved in the first rebellion ever to take place in the universes of time and space. All through the paradise career, reward follows effort as the result of cause. Such rewards set off the individual from the average, provide a differential of creature experience, and contribute to the versatility of ultimate performances in the collective body of the finaliters. 579.
That's the end product of a world such as ours. Let's contrast a normal and an abnormal world. What do we call our normal world? Do we have a name for it? Let's just say normal world. And Earth, Urantia, our world. Our world was an experimental world, but this in itself is not an abnormality. 10% of all the worlds in time and space, all evolutionary worlds, are given to the life carriers. That is, the life carriers are given a wider latitude of experimental design in terms of the germplasm to be evolved. But this is not an experiment in the sense of trying something wild and new. The forecasts, the predictions, the outworking of these experiments are carefully checked out. And these plans are very carefully approved. So the fact that we're an experimental world is a normal thing. Again, 1 world out of 10 is called an experimental world. They're called decimal worlds, or every 10th world. Our world started out in a very normal way. Our sun was born roughly 6 billion years ago. Is that about right, Burke? It was a solitary sphere. A passing physical system caused our pulsating sun to experience major convulsions, at the peak of which the matter now contained in the solar system was drawn off of the sun by tidal gravity attraction plus the pulsation of the sun. That happened about 4.5 billion years ago. By the time we get to 1 billion years ago, our sphere, Urantia, had attained its approximate present physical size. And they roughly date the beginning of planetary history at about that time. Was it around 600 million years ago that the first scouting party came out here? That's roughly the right date. They looked this place over, projected a sodium chloride pattern of life, salt solution, obviously we are, decided that the seas weren't salty enough, withdrew, returned 50 million years later. These are awful big numbers that I'm throwing around here. And made 3 life implantations. That is to say, they planted primitive life, life out of which both vegetable and animal life evolved. They made 3 implantations in the briny seas. This life evolved in a pretty normal fashion. I don't think the life carriers planned dinosaurs. I think they were a little bit startled when they evolved. This was a byproduct off the main line of evolution. Things happened pretty normally, in line with their plans, until we got mammalian life. There's a suggestion in this book that they attempted to produce a pre-placental mammalian type here. That failed. Didn't succeed. They had to wait for the evolution of the normal placental type mammal. Man appeared just slightly under 1 million years ago. And here is the first deviation from the normal. Again, this is not an abnormality. This is a normal outworking of an experimental world. Normally, the evolutionary races arise independently out of animal stock by successive independent mutations. On this world, starting with the red race and going right down through the spectrum, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo. Some worlds have only 3, red, yellow, blue. But they either have 3 or 6, that's standard. On our world, we get a pre-red race. The last survivors and the purest survivors of this race are today's Eskimos. They are the Urantia aborigines. Want to talk about that? Well, they always dwelled in the north, and they are the foxhole people who are puzzling to anthropologists because they appear as a relatively pure human type in England, and they're much older than they have any right to be. They don't show the Neanderthal type of animal admixture. The original race was called Andonites, from the name which was given to the firstborn male, Andon. We'll talk a little about Andon and Fauna. They were dual mutations arising out of a Primates tribe. These Primates were pre-human, a pre-human stock of origin in the Lemur type. The lemurs underwent successive mutations in a peninsula, which was then in the Persian Gulf area, and they produced the dawn mammals, the mid-mammals. Now, it was the mid-mammals who gave rise to 2 mutations, one progressive and one retrogressive. The progressive mutation was the Primates. The retrogressive mutation was the ancestors of the modern simian tribe. we did not descend from monkeys, but man and monkey came from a common stock. Out of the primates, there arose the first true human beings. The primates had primitive speech, and they had learned to use clubs, I believe. And they occasionally fed fire, which had been naturally ignited by lightning. The twins were subject to much jealousy. These were sib twins, male and female. They decided they better run away because they weren't getting along too well with the tribe. And this is a very interesting example of where providence functions. The twins decided to flee. They had no maps. They had no knowledge of geography. The life carriers supplied the concept northward. That was the only way out. But they didn't supply the concept until the twins had made the decision to flee. Then they got help. They got help in determining the direction of flight. I suppose it came to them as a hunch. Well, this is probably the best way out of here, see. They weren't conscious that anyone had told them, go north. They just planned to go north. The papers tell, if you'll recall, the story of the first time that they manufactured fire. The male had discovered the sparking propensity of flint. And he tried to make fire, and he was unsuccessful until his mate one day found an abandoned bird's nest, which was highly inflammable. And they built their first fire. And it was a long time before they worked out that the bird's nest was not just as important as the flint. For a long time they felt that the way to make a fire was you got to get a bird's nest, and then the flint will work. They founded the Andonic clan in northern Europe on the heels of the retreating ice. And it was this clan which later mated with some of the primates strains which debased the human strain. What we call missing links are not actual missing links. They are degradations of pure human stock, such as the Neanderthal type. So far, we have a normal world, except we have a pre-red race, which is not typical. And again, we have a long delay in the dispatch of a planetary prince. This world was under the jurisdiction of the life carriers, assisted by a council of Melchizedeks. These are local universe sons. Superhuman beings. The life carriers are biological technicians. About 500,000 years ago, in and around what is now northern Pakistan and Afghanistan, were the Bedouin tribes. And they engaged in a series of intertribal warfares, wars which greatly decimated the tribes. Now, primitive war has some virtues. It kills the stupid and the slow. The intelligent and the quick and the strong survive. As a result, there was a gradual purging of the animal strains that were in these tribes. You had a gradual cleansing of the genes. And in one generation, in one family, the colored races mutated. They were all Sibs. The name of this family was the Sangik family. Hence, the colored races of this world are called the Sangik races. And the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and indigo races appeared by mutation in one family and began to spread. It was at that time that our planet received a planetary prince. This is a normal happening. Sooner or later, it happens on every planet. This is not a corporeal being. This is a created being. He's specifically designed to function as the head of superhuman government on an evolutionary world. Because he has to be sympathetic with fairly barbarous conditions and whatnot, he is created with a large measure of imperfection so that he will not be too remote from the problems of his world. A planetary prince reports to a system sovereign. A system sovereign lives on an architectural, made-to-order physical cluster of spheres, and he has jurisdiction over 1,000 evolutionary planets, or will have. In our local system, when our prince was commissioned, there were 606 evolutionary worlds. They were building up towards the 1,000. The name of our planetary prince is Caligastia, was Caligastia. The name of our system sovereign was Lucifer. Right away you can see what's coming. These are real beings. How does the prince make contact with the evolutionary peoples? Well, he has associated with him many beings on the order of angels, seraphim, but he also has 100 unique members on his staff. These beings are ex-mortals, men and women who have lived, have died, have survived, have gone on to this architectural cluster, which is the system capital. And when they commissioned Prince Caligastia to come down here, they put out a call for volunteers. Who would like to go on a unique adventure as corporeal members of the staff of a planetary prince? From among the volunteers, they picked 100 ex-males and 100 ex-females. They transported them here. And they set to work and they constructed physical physiques for these people. At the same time, they assembled 100 Andonites. They just got a hunch to go wandering. And lo and behold, they wandered down into the direction of where the city of the prince was to be. They put these 100 Andonites to sleep. And from them, by physical surgery, they removed a part of their reproductive equipment. I suggest they probably took one testicle and one ovary. Would make sense. They engrafted these in the bodies of the sleeping members of the prince's staff, because otherwise they would have been non-reproducing beings. Then they woke them all up. There were 200 of them. 100 in full possession of the knowledge of the arts and culture of the system capital, which would mean they would know about everything to and including atomic energy and beyond. The other 100 savages here on Earth. And they associated themselves by couples. They built the city of the prince. And this was an actual city with walls and living quarters. It was made of stone. It was in the Persian Gulf area. It was the city called Dalmatia. the city which has come down to us in blurred Sumerian legend as the city of Dilmun, whence the gods first gave man civilization. You'll find reference to it in the Gilgamesh legend, which is the oldest heroic epic reduced to writing. It goes back to Sumerian. They brought people in, evolutionary people, and they taught them the arts of agriculture. They taught them writing. They taught them religion. They taught them defense against predatory animals. They were organized, this 100 were, into 10 councils. The names of these councils are suggestive. The Council on Food and Material Welfare, the Board of Animal Domestication and Utilization. This is very practical. The Advisors regarding the Conquest of Predatory Animals, the Faculty on Dissemination and Conservation of Knowledge, the Commission on Industry and Trade, the College of Revealed Religion, the Guardians of Health and Life. Baptism originally was established when the Guardians of Health and Life talked the College of Revealed Religion into making a weekly bath a religious requirement. That's the origin of baptism. The doctors couldn't get them to bathe unless they made a religious ritual out of it. Then they'd bathe. That's on 747. The Planetary Council on Art and Science, the Governors of Advanced Tribal Relations, and the 10th one is the Supreme Court of Tribal Coordination and Racial Cooperation. That was headed up by Van. The Council of Industry and Trade was headed by Nod. The name may be familiar to you. The things progressed down here very much in a normal way until about 200,000 years ago. This means the regime had been here for about 300,000 years. When Lucifer raised the flag of rebellion against the universe government, in essence, he seceded from the universe, declared his local system autonomous of the universe. That's a story in and of itself. But the rebellion hit us because our planetary prince agreed beforehand to joining. And when he proclaimed himself God of Urantia, God of this world, was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, an ex-mortal, who challenged him. And I think this is great. Here's a guy that isn't too far removed from the human level. Sure, he's died, but he hasn't gone on very far. If this life be kindergarten, then let's say at most he's gone through first grade. And he had guts enough to stand up, and wisdom enough, and assurance enough to stand up and brand this as treason. And he couldn't be downed. And he headed up the loyalist side, which everyone who understood took sides. He either went one way or the other. And for 7 years, there was no answer as to who was right, until one of the higher authorities arrived, stripped the planetary prince of authority, and set up a new regime. The fat is in the fire. During this time, they taught the evolutionary peoples advanced techniques which they hadn't earned. They quickly translated unearned liberty into license. Soon the members of the that disloyal members of the prince's staff were defending the city against the attacks of the barbarian hordes. And long before the city was destroyed, they'd been driven out. Premature liberty is always converted into license. The loyalists withdrew, and most of them were removed from the planet except for Van, the old Chief Justice, and his human associate. They persisted here, maintaining certain aspects of culture up in the mountainous regions of Asia Minor. And it was these two who prepared Eden for the arrival of Adam. They knew he was going to be dispatched sooner or later. They sent out scouting expeditions. They picked the site, which became the first Garden of Eden. It's a now submerged peninsula, extending out from the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea. When Adam arrived, they'd been at work for a generation on Eden. They built a couple of brick walls across the isthmus of the peninsula with narrow openings. They'd stocked the area in between with wild animals. This is a pretty good defense. They built extensively in brick. They had practically this thing under cultivation. And it wasn't a bad welcome, even for a normal world. Now, in a normal world, the arrival of Adam and Eve would have found not just Eden, but it would have found a well-established city with ancient traditions, a fine school system, a budding civilization on the world instead of pretty barbarous conditions such as obtained on our world. He would have found the support of a planetary prince, a corporeal staff. It would have had a springboard, a point of departure, momentum of progress, which was completely lacking in our world. Adam and Eve held forth for about 125 years when they defaulted in their mission. The Adamites were not supposed to blend their blood with the races of Earth until they had accumulated a real reservoir, population reservoir.